Hi everyone, Michael here with Panacea Coffee, and today I wanted to show you guys the recipe that I use when I want a flavored iced coffee drink. We're going to be brewing it through the Aeropress. The previous video that we put up with the Aeropress was a method for making hot coffee that was fully diluted. So what is in your cup is ready to drink as is. This version, we're not going to invert it, we're going to do it more according to the original recipe that the guy who invented the Aeropress laid out. And so that ends up in more of a concentrate. And why I really like that for making iced mixed drinks is because you end up with that concentrate, which is great because you're then going to be diluting it with milk. So you don't want it to be fully diluted already, because then when you add your milk in, then it's even more diluted, and you end up losing a lot of the coffee flavor that you're after. So that's the advantage of this. So for this one, we're still gonna weigh, just for the sake of consistency. So you can do anywhere from, I would say 20 to 25 grams of coffee for this recipe. That's a little bit more than some of the other coffee recipes that we have up. And the reason for that is that we're brewing at a lower temperature, and so you don't extract as much out of the coffee. So you need to compensate for that by doing a little bit more coffee. So I would say anywhere between 20 and 25 grams of coffee is about the right amount to have just that right amount of coffee flavor to punch through all the other the flavoring and the milk that you're also going to be adding to the drink. So I already have that measured out. I'm doing 25 grams. So I will grind that up and then we'll get brewing. So a couple of things that I want to mention before we get brewing is what type of coffee should you use. We obviously want to be using a coffee that goes well with milk, but we also want to do something that is kind of has more of a neutral, like classic coffee flavor, rather than something that is really fruity. And that's especially true when you're adding the flavoring. So if we were just going to brew this without any flavoring and we were just going to add milk, wouldn't matter as much. Most coffees should taste pretty decent. But when you add like caramel and vanilla and flavors like that, and then you also have maybe some of these like sweet berry flavors that are present in some, like the single origin coffees especially, then it's just a little bit weird, at least to my taste, because you kind of have two different types of sweetnesses competing. So for a drink like this, I would typically go with something like our Cornerstone blend, you know, something that has just a very classic coffee flavor. It's going to be like pretty akin to the other types of like sweet flavored drinks that you've had at other places. With that in mind, what I like to do is I just use this Torani stuff. I'm sure there's other things like it that you can get. That's just what I find is readily available most places. And the level of sweetness from person to person, like what you prefer, is obviously going to vary. I like something that has enough sweetness that it is satisfying, but not so much that it like knocks my socks off and I can't really taste anything else. And I typically find, at least with this stuff, that right amount of sweetness is about 2 teaspoons worth of flavoring. So you could do 2 teaspoons of vanilla, or what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do 1 of vanilla and 1 of caramel, and together they provide the correct amount of sweetness, but then we also get a little bit of that caramel flavoring. What I'm going to do is actually measure these out and put them into the bottom of the cup that we're going to be brewing into, because then as we're brewing the hot coffee, they'll actually mix really well. And so you won't get like patches of sweetness and patches of non-sweetness. It'll just be really well homogenized, I guess the word would be. So now that we have our 2 teaspoons of flavoring in the bottom of the cup, we are going to brew over top of it. So get your Aeropress, put your filter onto the bottom. And then for this one, actually a little feature of this funnel, which is kind of cool, is that like this cup that I'm brewing onto is a little bit too narrow. So the Aeropress doesn't fit onto it, but no worries. We can just put our funnel on there and then put our Aeropress on top. And then we'll put our coffee in here. And for this, I like to do a 4-to-1 ratio, which is way more concentrated, obviously, than like 1-to-15 or 1-to-16, which is what we've done for some of the pour over stuff. So 1-to-4 is good. And my water I would go for about 180 degrees. I think that's a good temperature. So we're all taired out. And I have 25 grams of coffee, so I'm going to go to 100 grams or milliliters of water. And you can do this pretty quick. I ground fairly, pretty fine, maybe a little bit finer than you would normally go for Aeropress, just because you really want that bold flavor to cut through all the milk and the flavoring that we're putting in. We get our stir, give it a quick stir, make sure everything is nice and wet, contributing to the brew. And then you're just going to press it nice and easy. There's no hurry. You can just kind of lean on it. And so now we're brewing on top of our flavoring, so it should be nice and homogenized by the time we're done brewing, because we have all that hot liquid melting with the flavoring. Now, obviously I'm doing flavoring for this. You could, if you don't want any sweetness and you just want like a nice cold beverage that has milkiness to it, because it is kind of nice to have milk in your coffee sometimes. I especially like it in the afternoon, especially with the weather getting hot. It's kind of nice to have kind of like a classic milky iced coffee drink. So for that, you could do exactly what we're doing here, but you just wouldn't add the flavoring. And then from there, you just add ice, add your milk, and then you're good to go. No flavoring at all. Now I still have my spoon that has a little bit of that flavoring on it, so I just kind of use that to stir this up, make sure it's nice and incorporated. And then I'm going to grab my ice, and you can add as much or as little ice as you want. I just kind of try to add enough to where it's kind of pokes out of the coffee a little bit, because it will melt a little bit. And I mean, you want a nice cold drink. You don't want it to be almost cold. And then from there you add your dairy. And again, this is kind of a matter of preference. What I normally do, I don't have any today, but I would normally add the whole milk, which I do have. And that's going to be the bulk of what you add to it. And then I might even add a splash of heavy cream at the very end, just to add a little bit of extra like dairy fat. That richness adds a really nice mouthfeel to it. So from there, just give it a stir. Let some of the ice dilute a little bit, because you want to make sure it's nice and cold from top to bottom. And this will be good even if you let it sit rather for a little bit, and it'll dilute it a little bit. That's totally fine, because we did brew with that concentrate, so it'll still be tasty. If you kind of are drinking it and you let it sit for 20 minutes and you come back to it, it's still very pleasant. Yeah, and that's really pleasant. So this has been the iced flavored coffee drink with the Aeropress. I hope you guys give it a try and enjoy it. We'll see you next time.